Hey everyone, I'm Adam Tanaka with Cavehouse Supply, and welcome to our video series, At the Table, where we have conversations with experts, educators, parents and caregivers, and even kiddos themselves about strategies that actually work for families in the home. This is about empowering kids and supporting the people who love them, you. I started this because families are constantly looking for practical ways to help their kids thrive, while also taking care of themselves. And honestly, that balance isn't always easy to find. In fact, it can feel almost debilitating. I'm not a parent, I want to make that clear. But I was a kid once, and I remember what I needed. But I also remember the lack of support that my parents had when they needed guidance the most. I think it's so easy to forget that we not only need to provide a safe space for our kids, but as adults, we need that safe space as well. If you already know about Cavehouse Supply, then you know that we're all about bringing optimism and adventure into family life, and we do that by empowering kids with confidence and creativity while supporting families. And if you're new here, welcome! I'd love for you to check us out at cavehousasupply.com, and if you're up for it, join in on the adventure. Now let's dig into the conversation at the table. Today I'm talking with Christian Vinceneux, a life and parenting coach from California who's been supporting families for well over 20 years. We're diving into something that hits pretty close to home for so many families: how parents can stay regulated when their kids are anything but calm. So Christian, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm always excited to meet with you and talk about what I'm talking about.
This is such a treat for me because, for context, Christian and I met through a mutual friend via LinkedIn. And maybe this is just one-sided, but after our first video call, I was sold on this guy. I was sold on Christian. I was like, how can we become best friends? And so again, this is probably one-sided, but I was like, this guy is so knowledgeable and so passionate about the work that you do. And we just started deep diving. We kind of lost track of time. I knew that when I decided to start doing these videos, he was the first person to reach out to and to contact. So I'm so stoked for you to be the first one on here, and thank you so much again.
Thank you.
So real quick, I saw this post this morning from a comedian. His name was Dustin Nickerson. I've never heard of him until I saw this post. He's in his 40s, but I thought that this post was fitting somewhat for what we'll be discussing. And it said, he said, yes, my generation does a lot of therapy, but we do a little less therapy if our parents would have done a little therapy. It was something too that like a ton of people were reposting that, but it was like I started thinking about my childhood growing up, and I believe that 100%. Like if my parents had that support, because I'm always thinking about the kids, the support that I didn't have or my sister didn't have. But then thinking back, it's like if my parents had that support, a therapist or something, maybe I wouldn't be going to therapy every week, every other week. Maybe it would be a once a month or something. But anyways, I saw that post and I was like, I have to share it because it kind of made sense to me, and it felt like it fit with our conversation. So time to dive in. The topic we're going to be discussing today is helping parents stay regulated when kids are not. And I will want to open up with this question: why are we even talking about parent regulation when the child's behavior is the challenge?
Valid question, right? And a question that I've often heard parents ask, and I'll start with one of my favorite phrases when I speak to parents is that whenever and for context, I work with neurodiverse families, so I work specifically with parents raising ADHD or autistic child, and so a lot of what I talk about can apply to all kids and all families, but it's there's some dynamics related to ADHD and autism that are very, very specific. Just want to be transparent about that and give some additional context. So one of my favorite phrases to start with is that whenever a child is, let's say, For an example, not transitioning when you ask them to. Not, they're delaying the process, they're stalling the process, they're distracted, they're doing something else, they're saying, oh, 1 more minute, or whatever it is, or even worse, they're melting down. So the first thing I tell parents, to put it in a broader context, is that your kid is not giving you a hard time. They're having a hard time. And it seems like a simple shift, but it can make such a huge difference, because it opens the door to really, first, not taking things personally, even though it's easier said than done, but it's and it can make it a little easier to bring some more empathy into the picture, but also look at what does your child need in those moments. What's at the root of this. If they're not doing what you're asking them to do, they're not transitioning, it's time for school, it's time to get the backpack and put the shoes on and get everything you need, and they're not doing it, and what's at the root of that. And it may seem, the first answer might be, well, they're just being lazy, they just want to, they're not being responsible, they're not being okay. That's looking at it from the blame perspective, which is not going to help. And then the parents is going to find themselves stuck in that negative cycle of interaction, just repeating themselves over and over and over, and the child is going to feel worse about it, and the parent is going to feel worse about it. So it's not going to improve the connection, the relationship between the two. And so when we look at, well, what does the child need in those moments? Well, the first thing is that they may be dysregulated. Dysregulated is a big word, but it looks at how we manage our emotions, and the human brain deals with a lot of emotions, you know, all the time during waking hours, and some of them are more labeled as the positive emotions, joy, happiness, excitement, whatnot, and others that tend to be labeled more as the negative emotion. They're not negative or positive. They just tend to be a little more difficult to manage, like sadness and anger and frustration and disappointment and whatever it is. And so when our brains feel those emotions, emotions release chemicals in our brains. They release neurotransmitters, and those chemicals have different impacts on our, not just on our brain, but on our entire system, on our body, on the way we feel, on the way we move. That can it can influence what we want to do, what we get motivated with or not. And so we're wired to, when everything goes well, as kids, we gradually learn how to manage our emotions, and how to manage our emotions so that we can do whatever it is that we need to do in that moment. So an example would be that, if it's time for a game of chase on the playground during recess, our energy needs to ramp up at a pretty high level. Our body needs to be running, and we need to be maybe shouting, and it's okay to be shouting. There's nothing wrong about it. So being regulated in that context means that our energy level is really high. And then the bell rings, and kids are expected to go back in the classroom and sit and listen. And in that moment, being regulated means that they can calm their body, that they can calm their mind, and they can focus on whatever they need to be focusing on, with the teachers talking about, or an assignment that they need to do. And so when everything goes well, that happens somewhat effortlessly. Kids may need a couple of little nudges and say, hey, it's time to focus. It's time, we can't play anymore. But some kids have a harder time than others. And it can be a, multitude of reasons. But so when it comes to ADHD and autism, that happens a lot. That happens in pretty much, throughout the day, in all sorts of situations, because regulation is one dynamic that's often challenging when it comes to neurodivergence, especially ADHD and autism. So what it may look like is the child has a hard time transitioning when they're asked to transition, transitioning to get ready for something, transitioning to start homework, transitioning to stop playing and come have dinner, or take a bath, or get ready for bedtime, or, whatever the situation is. Transitions can be difficult because it requires our brains to shift gears, and to kind of like let go of what we're doing now. And of course, if we're doing something pleasurable and we ask to do something that doesn't seem really pleasurable, that's even, requires even more work on our part. But it requires a lot of changes in our brain that we take for granted. And so the child having a hard time shifting gears in that context. They don't know. They don't know why they're having a hard time. So they may resist. They may say no. They may say yes, okay, and not be able to transition. It's not necessarily because they don't want to. It's just that there are a lot of other factors that are interfering. Maybe they're already stressed prior to that, and then there's one more demand that pushes them over the edge. Or maybe they're concerned about, they're worried about when it comes to, let's say, homework. They know they have to do something that is really difficult and that they don't really feel competent with. It could be a writing assignment, it could be a math assignment, it could be, whatever it is. It could be their handwriting part, it could be all sorts of things. It could be that their body really loves to move, has a lot of energy, and they're having to sit still, and that's just excruciating for them,
Mm.
and they're really having a hard time doing that. Okay, so but they're not necessarily consciously aware of what's making it difficult. So when the parent asks, okay, do this and do that, and the child isn't doing it, it could be that they just don't know how to do it, or they're looking at it like thinking, oh man, this is just going to be so hard. I don't want to do this. I don't think I can, and so is it that, in that moment when the child is resisting that transition, it might not be a full meltdown, but it's really important to understand, well, what's at the root of that. What's causing the breakdown? Why is my kid having a hard time doing what I'm asking him to do? And I talk a lot about transitions because it happens a lot in daily life. I mean, we go through hundreds of transitions every day with all sorts of situations. But it's, regulation shows up in lots of different ways. It could be that, some kids had a hard time falling asleep at night because they all wired up, and they all, they have extra energy, and they can't really calm down as easily as maybe their brothers or sisters. And so the parents may be confused and say, well, everybody else is falling asleep fine. What is wrong with you? You just purposely not calming down. You purposely staying up, and it might not be the case at all. Usually it's not on purpose. It's there's something else going on. So really, the first thing is to my encouragement is always for parents to acknowledge that there's more to the picture, there's more to the behavior, and the behavior is whatever we see from the outside. That's the proverbial tip of the iceberg. We need to look at, well, what is this behavior telling us? Is my child already overwhelmed from what happened 10 minutes ago, an hour ago, or throughout the day? Did they have a substitute teacher and it made it harder on them? Was it raining and they didn't get to have as much outdoor activity? Or they had a falling out with a friend, and your teen now is just really dysregulated because they their friend is not talking to them, or it could be all sorts of reasons. And but really looking at what could be causing my kid to have a hard time right now. So that's the first thing to look at. And most of the time, even when we all have biases. And I grew up with a very different mindset than the one I have today. I operate with the mindset that's considered very neuro affirming. That's really taking into consideration what the child's nervous system is going through in that moment, so that we can create interventions, or use strategies that support the child, as opposed to making things harder for them. But I didn't grow up with that mindset, because at the time nobody talked about neurodivergence, and nobody really understood that framework. And so even with the fact that this is my work and I'm very passionate about it, I'll still have those knee jerk reactions, where at times, I'll hear, or I'll see a child, doing something, and my first thought will be, oh, what is wrong with them? And then immediately, I catch myself, because I've been working on this for, for a very long time. Then the next part is, okay, one thing that helps me is, are they really doing this on purpose? typically they don't. If you really look at things, deeper in the broader picture and really understand the child, they're not doing this on purpose. They're not doing any of this on purpose. They're struggling meeting the demand in that moment, meeting the expectation. And that's really, I digress a lot with, ADHD, makes it often harder for me to stay on topic and be succinct, and so thank goodness for the editing.
I think you had some valid points. You said something earlier that really stuck with me and that made me actually, it took me back to a very specific time when I was in 3rd grade, and I didn't wanna get ready for school. I woke up almost every morning with a stomach ache, and my parents just thought, "Oh, he's just sick all the time." Not and I didn't know either, but I was anxious as hell, and it was for a specific reason, so I would take my time getting ready for school. And I remember, and you said this earlier, but what they would do for me, 'cause grew up in a small town, southern town, they would do the whole, like, "Alright, I'm gonna count to 3, and you'll need to get your backpack and blah, blah, blah," it's 1, 2, and then they would say, "Hey, you need to stop being difficult." And it's like, "Oh man, I'm difficult." But what was going on was I had a 3rd grade teacher, English teacher, who I'm left-handed, and every day she would take my pencil and take it out of my left hand and put it in my right hand and said, "This is the way to write." She said, "I do not want to see that pencil in your left hand. Nobody else in this classroom is left-handed. You're not either. You need to write with your right hand." And I didn't tell my parents this for a long time. And so of course I wouldn't. I was blaming myself as a kid. I was like, I need to learn how to write with my right hand. I really do. Like,
Mm.
and I was trying to learn other things, right-handed. And finally it got to a point to where I was like, "Hey, mom, this is what's going on. I can't do it. It's really hard. Can you help me write right-handed?" And she's like, "Oh, I'm not gonna help you. You're left-handed. Give me a sec, give me a day." She went up there, talked to the teacher, never happened again. I don't know what was said, but that never happened again. But my parents didn't understand what was going on, and they just thought I was being difficult. They were counting to 3 because I wasn't wanting to go, with stomach pains, and it's like, "Oh, you're just sick. You'll be fine. Just let's go." And it truly did not want to because of that thing. And yeah, and so when you were talking, it was truly like, not just thinking about that story, but so many other stories. Hearing that, but a lot of my friends have kids, and so when I'm hanging out with them and their kids come up to them to tell them what's going on, and just having that relationship, that open relationship of communication, it's almost like, man, I really envy that. I didn't have that as a kid. And so yeah, that's what popped in my head and while you were talking about that. So I think this kind of flows really well into kind of the next question. How does a parent's regulation or dysregulation impact a child's ability to calm down?
We really wired to notice other people's emotions, and it's really, I believe it's really what allows us to interact socially and to, forge relationships, and whether they're, friendships or work relationships, or romantic relationships, and what allows us to do that is to notice how people feel around us, and to attune to that, because and we've all experienced, if we get into a room, or we start talking with someone who's really really angry, and it was just for whatever reason, it's going to affect us on some level. We might not get angry, but it's going to affect us. And if we're around people who are more negative, constantly complaining about something, it's going to bring us down, and vice versa. If we have people who tend to be more upbeat, or, it's going to lift us up. And the reason why it happened, it's a very unconscious process. It's just, we have, among other things, we have those neurons in the brain, those brain cells that are called mirror neurons. And mirror neurons allow us to tune into the other person's emotions, and whatever we feel when we're interacting. and it can absolutely happen through, screens, or it can happen to, on the phone call. We can detect the emotions through the voice, and that's what allows us to interact and manage relationships, and be a little more aware of what's the other person going through. So it's a good thing. It's a good thing. And so what happens is, what that creates, it creates a dynamic where that's often not often enough talked about in the context of parenting, is that if the child is dysregulated, that's going to make it more likely that the parents will become dysregulated in the process, because it's hard. It's hard. If you have a child who's screaming, who's melting down, it's really hard to stay calm in the process. And we know that with, ADHD and autism, kids tend to get more dysregulated. And I won't get into all the reasons here, because we don't have enough time. But it's again, they're not doing that on purpose, and they're learning. They're having to figure out how to manage their own emotions, and often, neurodivergent kids have to operate in a world that's designed more for neurotypical worlds, not neurodivergent minds. And so a lot of things can become stressful. And so but vice versa, when the parent is dysregulated, that can also dysregulate the child. And so what I want to make sure is that people don't walk away from this feeling like I'm blaming them for oh, as a parent, then you don't have the right to be dysregulated. You should be calm all the time, because otherwise you're going to mess up your kid. And it's absolutely not my message. It's never been my message, because it's just not realistic, and it would not be showing the child a realistic picture of what adult life is about, because we all get dysregulated for one reason or another. That's just normal. That's just what happens. We all get disappointed. We all get angry. We all get, and sad. And so that's when parents tune in a little more into that dynamic. So, part of it is understanding the kind of, like, you don't need to become an expert on regulation as a parent, but just understanding the big pieces, that it's something that is happening whether or not we want it to happen. And have some words for it to make it easier to talk about it, to label your own state. So it could be, it doesn't have to be the word dysregulation. I mean, I've had many families who start using it, you know, then I've seen 3, 4-year-olds saying, I'm dysregulated. And,
Wow.
nobody else, that people within the family know what it means, but it works for the family culture because it's the word they use it. It could be anything. It could be I'm stressed, whatever the word is, but just labeling it, and understanding that there's more to it. But it also gives parents an opportunity to reflect on their own state, and to look at, okay, if let's say they're finishing with work, and they're transitioning into spending time with their child, and they've had a really, really difficult work day, or difficult meeting, or difficult test, and they're just really amped up and frustrated and on edge, to at least take a minute, whatever is possible, because we know that, with parenting, with this, what's ideal, and then there's what's feasible, and they're often very different. uh and but to take a minute to at least acknowledge to yourself, like, okay, how am I feeling right now? Oh man, I'm like so dysregulated. I'm so stressed. I'm on edge. I'm so irritated. Okay, that's probably going to spill onto onto your interaction with
Mm.
whoever you interact with next. That's just the way it works. Okay, so what can we do? What's in our power in that moment? We can't eliminate the frustration. We can't go from 100 to 0, from super irritated to calm, in a couple of minutes. It's just not realistic. But what can we do? It's never about being perfect as a parent. It's about being intentional. The
Mm.
more intentional parents are, the more they can make things work in the best possible way for their child, and for themselves, for the whole family. So, what can they do in that moment to, you know, take a deep breath, or to whatever it is that's in their power in that moment, to try to calm things down a little bit. And then sometimes, it depends on the child, and I'm already going into what to do about it, which was not the question you asked me, but yeah, it was more about, the dynamic of when one get dysregulated, the other gets dysregulated. And so that's a really important piece to recognize, because once parents start recognizing that, it's another step that makes it a tiny bit easier to take that breather, or to think, okay, how do I want to go into that next situation with my kid?
Mm.
And how do I want to, how do I want to minimize spilling my emotions into my dysregulation onto my kid, because that's not, they don't have anything to do with it. And again, depending on the age of the child and the maturity of the child, on their understanding, it would be okay to share that you are dysregulated, that you are having a really hard day. Because one thing that I often see with parents is that they feel guilty about having those uncomfortable feelings, and they feel guilty about bringing them up to their child, feeling like, oh, my child doesn't, shouldn't have to deal with my emotions. But the problem is that sometimes the less we talk about our emotions, the more they show up in not really good ways.
Mm.
And so that's when it starts poisoning the interaction. So it's actually, I'm a big advocate of, let's bring it out. Now, obviously, we're going to have to package that depending on the child's maturity level. And that it could be something as, you know, mommy had a stressful day, daddy had a stressful day right now, and I'm I'm feeling stressed. I have a little bit of a headache, and I'm feeling so I can't really play a lot with you right now. And it's not because of you. It's because I'm having a hard time, and I need to do something for myself. Or I don't have, I can't play a lot right now. Or I don't have a lot of, you know, energy and a lot of bandwidth, whatever. Every conversation is going to look different. But because when you share this, you're achieving you're accomplishing a lot of really positive things. You're signaling to the child that it's not their fault. They haven't done anything wrong. You're taking ownership of your emotions, which is a great way to model that, because all parents want their kids to take responsibility for their emotions. So how do we get them to do that? By modeling that. By modeling that. And so even starting, simple share of how you're feeling as a parent can really pave the way for kids to do the same thing, because now suddenly it's, oh, mom is not being difficult, or I'm not being difficult, to use the word you shared earlier. Mom is having a hard time, or dad is having a hard time. And or as when the child is having a hard time, then they have a way to express that, where they don't have to feel ashamed about having a hard time, because they heard their parents share that they were having a hard time,
Mm.
in different situations. So it's a good way to model that, and it's a good way to bring things out to the open, and deal with whatever is there, as opposed to trying to hide it and cover it up, and have an interaction that doesn't feel really great, but everybody's a little confused because, well, why is my parent acting a little weird right now? Why is my parent just irritated at me? I didn't do anything, and that can lead to the child walking in eggshells and feeling like they're always saying something wrong, or when it's really just the parent who was in a bad space in that moment.
Yes, yes. So, again, taking me back to that, where, my mom struggled with depression, and pretty hardcore, to where she frequently attempted suicide a lot throughout my childhood. And it was one of those where it got to that point. So it was like, on the one hand, it's incredible to have that communicating, your emotions to your child, and being like, I've had a pretty hard day today, have a headache, you know, and then the other end was where it hit with me, of like walking on eggshells, like you just said, but also too, like, oh my God, why, along with the eggshells, it's like, what can I do to help? What can I do to help? And so then all of a sudden I become, I'm trying to like overcompensate for all these things. And then not realizing until I'm an adult, like, that was not great. And so because then that bled over to now I'm seeking external validation from strangers before I do anything. And what that comes down to in terms of, I can only speak for I don't have kids, but what I can only speak for, me being a kid and growing up in the environment I grew up in is that my parents were never open about their emotions ever. And when they were, it was like it was from 0 to 100, like, extreme, like, I just don't like mom saying, "I don't wanna be alive anymore," and me being, 10 years old being like, "What? Like, what?" And so, I think, a lot of dysregulation happening in that home constantly. But, yes, I love your approach to kind of what to I love your approach to for what to do for with with parents who are really, like, not feeling it with their children, and that kind of, again, flows right into that next question of practical strategies. What are some practical strategies parents can use in the moment when they're overwhelmed? Now, you mentioned so many in that previously. Is there anything that you would add to that, that you think could be impactful to the people that are watching this?
So yes, in addition to probably the first two that I already mentioned, but is to come up with some kind of language, some kind of word to label what it is. Whether it's the word dysregulated, the word stress, the word, whatever it is, but just to have a word that's consistently used so that everybody knows that, oh, I can name it. I can describe it, and everybody starts understanding what the other person is going through. Another thing is to really validate. So often, what happens is when someone close to us, so it can be a child, it can be, a partner, it can be when someone close to us seems to be in distress, what happens is we naturally want to fix it because we care. We care, and so we come from a place of we want to make things better. We want to support the other person. So the intention is typically really good. The delivery is not always great, and the delivery is not always effective. So often the delivery is along the lines of, "But you're fine.
Ugh.
Don't worry about it," or "It's gonna get it's a tiny little problem. You'll be okay. I promise you," or "You don't need to cry. It's not gonna solve anything," and so there are a couple of reasons why we say those things. One sometimes parents realize, as when I work with parents, often what happens is if that's a situation for them, they realize that in the process of working together that they have anxiety. They have anxiety with their child being uncomfortable or with their child being, distraught in the moment, which is a very, natural feeling to have. And so it's their anxiety that makes them want to fix things because they don't want to see their child struggling. But the problem is that telling your child, don't worry about it, it's going to be okay, or don't be sad, don't cry, or whatever it is, um, really does not address the situation, because what the child is struggling with is managing their emotions, is trying to cope with the impact of those emotions, whether it's the disappointment or feeling overwhelmed that they have to transition to doing homework, or not wanting to stop playing a video game because it's time to go to school, whatever the situation is. And so when all the parents has to do in those situations is not trying to fix it, because the solution is just to give space to those emotions and acknowledge them. So it could be, the child is crying, that, I can tell you're sad. Sometimes we're sad. It's okay. It's okay to be sad.
Mhm.
And that would be the first words. Or anger, same thing. It's like, I can tell you're angry. I can tell you're really upset. It's okay. It's okay to be angry. Sometimes it lasts for a bit, but and then it gets better. So it's not about fixing it, it's about acknowledging it, naming it, and not trying to fix it right away, because just giving it space in a 10-second interaction is probably is often does all the fixing that we need. And
True.
often, because it lets it tells the child that, okay, there's nothing wrong with me. I can express my emotion. I can cry. I can be upset. I can be mad. That's okay. And then, I'm not being disowned for doing that. I'm not being yelled at in response. And so I can show my emotions, and that, that's probably going to help the child calm down a bit, because they're feeling supported, they're feeling validated, they're feeling heard. And and then and then often the next step is, if needed, because it's not always needed, can be starting to look at solutions. If it's a really big problem, if the child says, well, there's this test today, or this thing that's happening today in school, and I still don't want to go because I'm scared, because, okay, I hear you, you sound really scared, and so that's the first step. And then second step would be, could be starting to help the child problem solve, but encouraging them to do that on their own. It doesn't mean that they can do it on their own, and again, it will depend if whether it's a 3-year-old or 20-year-old, or with language or no language, or it's conversations are going to be very different. But the next step, can be about, okay, well, how can I best support you right now? That could be one way to show support, to show that we care, show that we want to help, but we're not pushing any particular solution onto the child. And it could be that they shrug their shoulders and say, I don't know, nothing will help. Okay, but it's better coming from them, that because it means, if they're in the state where they're saying nothing will help, then can you imagine when we tell them what will help?
Hmm.
They'll push back. They'll push back.
Wow.
Right? So we have to take just smaller steps, and if the child says, well, nothing will help, and I can tell you're really upset. Maybe, what's something that's under your control? What's something that you have control over? Is there any tiny little thing that could help you feel a little bit better? And you know, they may think of something. But again, so you're kind of like trying to encourage them to come up with their own ways of solving, their own ideas of ways of solving the this challenge, as opposed to say, you need to take 10 deep breaths and you'll be okay.
Right.
Because in that moment, if they're upset, if they're really upset, they'll probably push back, and they'll feel worse after you've told them to take 10 deep breaths. Or they'll take 10 deep breaths with you, just to, appease you, and then they'll say, well, I still feel like crap.
Yeah.
It may feel counterintuitive. It may feel like you're not helping enough, or like you're ignoring your child, but just stretching that moment a little bit and resisting the urge to fix things, or to offer a solution right away, is often where it needs to start. And then, of course, the solutions sometimes, I've seen, before working as a parent coach, I worked as an occupational therapist for over 30 years. And so I worked with hundreds and hundreds of kids who were often very dysregulated for all sorts of reasons. Dysregulated because they wanted to keep playing with the toy, and it was time to play with something else. Or they were really excited playing a game. It was some kind of board game, and then they lost, and the sibling won, and there was a major meltdown. And so, those were real life situations, but I had to find ways to help them learn from those experiences without shaming them, without telling them what to do, without, it was always about helping them tune into the emotions. There can be a point where maybe you'd say, you would suggest some solutions, or after you've gone through those initial steps of validating, and asking what would help them, or how we can support them. You may say things like, well, I know in the past, when you were upset, you went shooting hoops in the driveway, and that seemed to help you. Or you jumped on the trampoline, and then you had fun with that, and that seemed to help you feel better. Or listening to music by yourself in your room, sometimes I've noticed that helps is that does any of that feel like it could help you? It's very different than you need to go to your room and calm
Yeah.
down and come back when you're ready. you know and because it's the message is, okay, let's figure this out together. You're not melting down on purpose. You're having a hard time. Okay, I acknowledge you. I see you. Doesn't mean I'm going to change my whole life, to accommodate this situation. But let's figure this out together. And it really paves the way for the child to do the same thing as they become older. To think, okay, I'm struggling with this. What is under my control?
Hmm.
What can I possibly do? Who's someone who can help me with this? Or, you know, what have I done in the past that's helped me? And can we get to those, can we make those connections on our own if our parents have never made them for us? Yeah, but it's gonna take a lot more work. It's kind of
Mhm.
like what you started with, today in our conversation, where it could make the difference with having to go to therapy once a week versus a lot less often, because and you know that it means we're having to learn how to reparent ourselves, because we never learned those skills in the first place. These are things that came up when you asked that question.
Yeah, what a confidence builder too. I mean, like, little micro ways of building that confidence, so by the time you get to your 20s, your late 20s, early 30s and stuff, you just feel a little bit more empowered. Like you said, it when you don't have that, it takes a little longer, but you can still get there. I saw something really cool in the airport, back in Nashville. I saw something super cool. I thought of you, wanted to share it. So there was a guy, his daughter, I'm guessing she was 4 or 5, 6 years old, something, 5 or 6. She she was pissed, like, she was very upset, and he and I probably looked odd because I was just watching the whole interaction, because I was fascinated because he brought her over to the side and just he asked her, like, he's like, I can tell you're upset." And the first thing he's like, "Where do you feel it?" And she was just like, "In here."
Mm,
She's just beating her in her chest a little bit, and he goes, "How you feeling
mm,
here?" Yeah, he's like, "Yeah, when I get upset, yeah, I feel it, like, in my chest too, and sometimes my tummy."
mm,
And "You know what I do though when I feel angry sometimes?" And she just, "No, what?" And he's like, "Sometimes I just like to dance." And he just started
mm,
kinda doing these, like, and he didn't care who was around. He was just like, some and she was like, "I wanna dance too." And so they were both, like, dancing off to the side, and people were just walking by, and I was just, like, pretty much in tears, watching this amazing interaction. I was like, "The world needs that." Like, so when you had mentioned basically that earlier of, not only naming it, but saying it out loud, that was the first thing that stood out to me, and that was pretty incredible to see.
beautiful interaction. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's yeah, because he did not shame her. He did not put another demand on her. He didn't say you need to calm down, or didn't say anything, like what's everybody gonna think, or none of that. And he just, he met her where she was at. And that's the most important thing. He
Mm.
started with, in his own words, with exactly where his daughter was. And I love that, he created, maybe not curiosity, but he kind of like led with curiosity by asking her question. And he's, but starting with himself, say, when I'm upset, I feel it like this. I feel it in my body. I feel it in my tummy. I feel it in my, where do you feel it? And then she was able to connect with that and said, I feel it here in my chest. And I mean, how empowering is that, to feel like, oh, my dad is getting me, versus asking me to do something that I don't know how if she had been told to, you need to calm down. It's like,
Right.
well, how am I supposed to calm down when I'm freaking out? I don't know why I'm freaking out. Or she may know, but maybe it was the, sense too much sensory input. A lot of people get dysregulated in airports. It's the noise, it's the, all sorts of things. It's the transition, it's the, having to wait for too long, or having to hurry up, and having to carry a lot of stuff and being afraid you're going to lose your stuff. I mean, there's a lot that's happening in the airports, right? So allowed her to connect and allowed him to connect with his daughter. So they were. I mean, I didn't see them, but it sounds from what you're sharing that they stayed connected through that simply by dad asking those questions in a way that she could relate, and then allowed her to move to a solution that may not have been perfect, but it sounds like it helped her a little bit. I mean, movement is one of the most powerful regulators in terms of helping a nervous system to calm down. It's not always possible. It doesn't, for some people, there are other things that can work a little better, or that movement is like our brain, the human brain is wired to benefit from movement, and movement actually helps the whole nervous system to calm down a bit and to be more grounded and organized. So, dancing around is probably helped her a lot.
That's the
It's
best.
beautiful.
I took his advice, and so like the next time I got a little angry, you just start dancing. Sometimes you just have to start
Yeah,
dancing.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so what are some common misconceptions about staying regulated?
That it's easy.
It's not easy. This is new information.
Or, another misconception is that parents have to be calm all the time.
Mm.
And that, being regulated means that there's no room for life struggles and that's unfortunately that still comes through the messaging of some therapists and coaches. And so I'll consume a lot of content because I also create content on online and on parenting and neurodivergence, and I'll read stuff that dysregulates me, because because it's it ends up shaming the parents and making them feel like they're just not doing enough, like they just and it's working on dysregulation does not mean that you have to be dysregulated, that you have to be regulated and calm all the time. It's not what it's about. It's about becoming, growing your self-awareness, growing your awareness about your how you're feeling about your state of things, having words to describe it, simple words, doesn't have to be technical or anything, and noticing how it affects you, like the story you were sharing about the father in the airport with his daughter. How do you feel when you dysregulate? I often have these conversations with parents. I have parents who tell me, they say, I want to learn how not to yell at my kid. I don't want to be that parent. And I hate that. That maybe, it's often a parent who grew up with that model, with parents yelling at them. And then, so when things get tough, their brain just immediately goes to that because that's what they grew up with. That was their normal. Or they just, something really rubs them the wrong way, and something that's, one of their kids' behaviors is just really, really triggering for them. Whatever it is, if you have a parent who's very sound sensitive and you have a child who screams a lot and who's really loud out of, when they're dysregulated, that's going to be a lot harder than a parent who's not sound sensitive, and when I work with parents to acknowledge that and say, I want to stop yelling at my kid because I just feel so horrible after I've done it, and I don't want to be that parent. But then the next day something happens, and I'm right back in that mode. So often they've gotten advice that they have to stay calm. That it's really important for their kid. It's like, well, that's the same thing that asking a dysregulated kid to calm down, and it's like, well, how do you do it? Parents are not getting dysregulated on purpose. So first we have to unpack a little bit. We have to take a little bit of time and go inward and think, okay, when am I dysregulated? What's happening in my body? How does it affect my body? you know where do I first feel it first? Is it just a on and off switch, or is it more like a dial, with this degrees of it? Or how do I feel it first? Do I feel it, in my stomach? Do I feel my shoulders and my neck? Do I feel it? Do I get a headache? Do I get, is it just this general surge of, oh, not again, and whatever it could be, but just tuning into that, and then really combining it with, okay, well, what's going on with your child in that moment? What's going on? Because empathy, if parents have loads of empathy, have a lot of empathy. So, if you can tap into empathy a little more, that gives you an anchor point that makes it a little easier to deal with whatever you're dealing with, as opposed to, pushing under the rug and say, oh, I don't have time for this, and so, but, recognizing it, labeling it, giving yourself grace that it doesn't mean that you have to be calm all the time as a parent. It's none of that. It's My encouragement is always to understand more what the issues are, because once we understand, we have more empathy. Once we understand, we it just gets a little bit easier to do. And it's never easy, but it just gets a little easier, and it gives us a framework. It gives us some ways to shape our actions. And another one that has come up is, I don't have time. I don't have time for that, because it may feel like it takes a lot of time. So again, it's okay to have that thought as an initial response, that I just don't have time for it. But helping the parents look at how, if they are stuck in a loop of, with the same type of interactions keep happening every single day or multiple times a week, or it's the same thing, then do you have time for that? How is that impacting your quality of life, your well-being of you and of your child and the whole family? Because I tell you, when a child becomes dysregulated very frequently, like often you see with ADHD and autism, it doesn't affect just the child or the parent. If they're siblings, it affects everybody. And so it's a family issue, not just a child issue.
Right.
And looking at it from that standpoint, so when I work, with parents, helping them see the big picture and how that can, have such a large impact, then often they start shifting a little bit their initial response, saying, okay, so what can I do with a little bit of time that, to make progress toward that? We don't have to change 100% of what we're doing every day, but what's small things that you can start doing to, and all the parents I've worked with always tell me that they've had that working with me, they've had to shift their perspective, they've had to learn a new framework. And so that was the difficult part. But the easy part is that they realize that it's not taking them any more time to parent, to change the parents to parent a different way. It's just they're having to put their energy and effort in toward different buckets. But it's not, they don't have to use more energy. And if anything, they actually have a lot more energy, because things start getting smoother and things start, there's a lot more calmness in the whole family. There's a lot more connection and the less power struggles. And that's invaluable.
That's incredible, and that's beautiful to think about. Yeah. You kinda answered this already, but I'm gonna ask it anyways. What can parents do to rebuild connection after both them and their child had been dysregulated?
It's a good question, and it's a broad one. So again, I'm going to give somewhat of a broad answer, and it has to be adapted for each particular situation, depending on, the family, culture, the the child's personality, maturity, age, abilities. And but one thing that I often advocate for is to reflect. So first, for the parents to reflect on their own. Okay, what just happened? What did I learn about myself, and what did I learn about my kid in that interaction? And what did I learn that they needed? What did I learn that why they became dysregulated? And what did I learn that helped them regain a regulated state? What did I learn about myself as a parent that got me dysregulated? What did I learn about, and what was hard for me in this situation? And once the parent can do that a little bit, then feed that back to the child. Find a way to share this message to the child. Because one thing that I've often found fascinating is, I've worked with parents my whole life, and I've worked with parents who are raising children with lots of different challenges. So I've seen parents who go to such huge extents of trying to figure things out and make things easier for their child, and trying to figure things out and talk with therapists and talk and read books and say, okay, this situation is going to be really difficult for my kids. So let me prepare them this way at first. And I'm going to, ease up on their schedule the day before or the hour before so that they're not as stressed, and then they'll have more bandwidth to do that difficult thing. Or I'll give them maybe some, objects, comfort objects that's going to help them, or whatever. And so the parents do all of this work, and the child never hears about it.
Mm.
I'm really big on finding ways to include the child in the learning process, because as the parent learns more and more about their child, how to best support them, they absolutely need to include the child in that process. So again, conversations are going to look very different based on the child, but saying things like, hey, let's say for a little one, 4 or 5, 6 year old, it could be conversations and, hey, I know that, and obviously the conversation needs to happen when everybody's calm. So never during the meltdown, never during, when everybody's upset, because the human brain does not process information well when we're upset, and it just
True that.
closes off the whole reasoning part, and so one, it could be at bedtime, it could be the next day, it could be, and say, hey, I'm just thinking about what happened yesterday. And, I know it was hard when I said it was time to clean up, and, you got really upset because you wanted to play more. And then, I got upset too. And I want to apologize to you because, I got upset. I raised my voice. And there's no reason to raise my voice. I know it was hard for you to clean up, and I want to help you clean up. So identifying a little bit of why you were, that I had a hard day. It's not an excuse, but now I realize that, oh, I was rushing a little bit, and that made me more impatient. Or, I noticed that when I started cleaning up with you, that you got really good at cleaning up. So I'm thinking that maybe sometimes, when we do things together, when we get things started together, that can be really helpful. I wonder what you learned about yourself yesterday. And looking at that, and they said nothing, that's okay. It's still putting that conversation, having that conversation over and over and over with, whenever it happens, helps the child start thinking along the lines of, what happened? Why did I become dysregulated? How did my parent help me? Or how were they doing? And it's a lot about, it's a lot of complex concepts, but the only way to get those complex concepts processed is to talk about them every single day, and to just reflect on those everyday little situations, little big situations, and feeding what we learn back to the child, and finding ways to include them in that process, to sharing, say, hey, I've noticed that, each time you go jump on the trampoline or ride your bike, you seem calmer afterwards. Do you feel calmer? And it doesn't matter what the child say. It's you're putting you're spotlighting something that you're noticing. You're not saying it's the absolute truth. You're saying that's what I'm seeing. Do you see that too? Or because it tells the child that, oh, what can that help me? I love riding my bike. Yeah, it feels good. Yeah, okay, maybe, but the most kids don't will tell you, yeah, I love to ride my bike, but they don't necessarily notice how they feel afterwards.
Right.
And how it carries over, and how the impact of certain activities can carry over positively and negatively. So those kinds of interaction can really build emotional intelligence, can build a lot of self-awareness with the child, and can really help their ability to manage their own emotions, because little by little, it's feeding them information that they can use to learn about themselves and decide how they want to manage themselves.
Man, that connection paves the way to a pretty successful adulthood for sure. Because I know now when I get worked up, if I go on a walk and I know how long it takes, when I'm back, I'm good and I've got ideas flowing and I'm in it. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. So, would you mind telling everyone what you're up to and where they can find you?
Through multiple ways. My website, people can start getting a sense of my approach, my philosophy with the information on my website. I have some videos, I have some success stories, case studies, so it's always a good place to start. People can also contact me through my websites, even make schedule a chat with me if they're interested and just have questions. I'm on LinkedIn a lot. That's how you and I met. And so I post there on a pretty regular basis. And I'm a little bit on YouTube and TikTok. And I work with parents. At this point, I mostly work through one-on-one coaching. So I work with parents in 3-month increments. We meet on a weekly basis and we tackle one situation at a time, and with really the goal of empowering the parents so that they'll feel more confident in their decision making and the way they parents, and whenever difficult situation will come up, they will have more clarity about, okay, why is this happening, and why is my child giving me a hard time because they're having a hard time, and how can I best support them? And they'll have tools and strategies and a mindset that will support growth.
Sweet. I have to end on this and ask, what are you working on right now that's just exciting you?
I'm working on a podcast with 2 other co-hosts, and it was just in the beginning stages of planning it, but with so it will be about neurodivergent challenges, stories, and really a way to empower neurodivergent folks and help them feel heard and seen, and share stories that they may relate to. Um, I'm working on a newsletter. I'm really excited to go a little more in depth with a specific topic for people who are seeking that information.
Well, congrats on the podcast and the newsletter. That's huge.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'll place all of those links below the video as well, to
Okay.
your website, to LinkedIn, social media stuff. But Christian, thank you so much again for being here and for the incredible insight and tips that I know will help parents and caregivers stay regulated through the storm, for sure. So thank you so much, man. It means a lot. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for being interested in this topic and for wanting to provide this space for parents.